Okay, good morning everybody, and thank you very much for attending this webinar. My name is Tim Cruzen and I'm a consultant at Slimstock. This webinar is about product lifecycle, the 5 steps to supply chain success. This morning's webinar will be provided by our consultant Louise Wolf, and after the presentation there is the possibility to ask questions, and if there are any questions, please type them into the chat box of the GoToMeeting console and we will attend to them. So now it's over to Louise. Thank you.
I'm going to start with a few questions and then work through how sales and operational planning meetings and collaboration between departments can help you better manage your assortment. These may be some of the questions that you face when you're looking at your inventory and your SKUs. What we're going to look at today is a few questions and then how we can help you to manage your assortment better. S&OP meetings are usually held on a monthly basis, but which departments and who are the driving force behind the decisions that you make in order to get your assortment correct? This is an example of the cyclical process which generally would take place and who would be involved in the collaboration process. Usually these meetings are taking place on a monthly basis, and each of these stages are what is gone through at that monthly meeting. Reviewing the demand, validating that demand, collaborating with the inventory and supply chains and the management of your organizations. Typical attendees on the left-hand side would be your category managers, supply planners, demand planners, salespeople, marketing, and you may also want to involve potentially those involved in the production processes if you're a manufacturing organization, and also from the point of view of storing the products, the warehouse manager or the operational director or manager as well. Many of you will recognize this particular slide because every product goes through a life cycle. There's the introductory phase, the growth phase, then into maturity, into potentially decline, and then the end of life and phasing out of those products. However, there are actually an additional phase, potentially. In a standard product life cycle, as shown here, the phase prior to the introduction of a product also needs to be considered. The phase 0 decision is to launch a product, yes, no, or potentially not at this particular time. The question is really, do you need to introduce other products? For example, here we've chosen a selection of things such as rubbish bins. There are an enormous number of these particular items available in the marketplace. Is it in your decision something that needs to be take one out of your assortment and bring another one in? Is it a new innovation and therefore you'd like to add it to the portfolio? Would it potentially attract additional customers or retain customers that you have? Is it at a good margin? Is it easy to source or able to be made if you're a production company? How long is the lead time? And can we actually fit it into the warehouse or the stores? Some ideas to think about prior to a phase 1 introduction is a product launch checklist. So basically, does it provide additional choice? Is it the one in, one out approach? What are we forecasting for that launch and how have we managed to calculate that forecast? Is it a fixed or variable price? The cost of setting that product up in the first place, marketing intelligence, quality checks, the holding and transportation costs, and what is the margin of this item? Where are we going to source it from? Is there a supplier contract in place, and how reliable is that supplier? If they're an existing supplier, they're potentially very reliable, but if they're new, have we actually checked them out as a supplier? Lead times and review times, and the coverage of the minimum order quantity that we need to get from that particular supplier. What is the objective for the launch of that item, and how are we going to determine the success? Are we going to make it a stocked or a non-stocked item at that stage? Once you've gone through that introductory phase and made a decision to actually introduce that product, you need to then work through the introduction and the growth phases. And how are you actually going to measure the performance of that item? Do you end up getting to a crossroads at this particular stage? And is it now a decision for your business whether you cut or continue at this crossroads with this specific item? So you've introduced your new products and you targeted what sales you feel that you're going to be able to achieve in collaboration with your marketing and sales teams. Then you're looking at the actual sales in the months from your targeted sales through your actual sales in the first 1, 2 or 3 months. Have you achieved your target? Yes or no? Do you then want to either cut that item or continue with it? Managing the maturity of these items is essential to the cut or continue decision. Understanding why is important. And how can you then prolong the performance of your mature items? In this classic example of music products, vinyl records were superseded by cassettes. They then got superseded by CDs, then MP3 players. However, from the early stages to today, we now have an additional problem because vinyl is making a comeback. Here, your marketing and sales teams have the opportunity to pick up on trends and help to keep with the rest of the S&OP team the information on an S&OP regular meeting basis, so you can work together to plan a strategy accordingly, either to prolong the product life or to be prepared to plan for the decline of that item. The resurgence of vinyl may be at this point, in this classic example, you might want to bring products back that you thought had actually declined completely. But how do you actually identify when a product is moving towards decline? Statistically, usually in this case, your product would have a negative trend. So your actual sales against your forecast would be trending downwards at this stage. But some of these items might be actually still creating value, and this is where an ABC analysis would be very useful to the organisation. The product may very well have become a C-class item. In this example, you can see where the bottom several items are actually now C classification, and they're in the bottom 1% of your sales and also of your order lines. But how do you plan into that, and which of these items are actually still creating value? Maybe you're looking at something that's only a temporary decline at this stage, or do you actually put a time scale on it and work out that maybe 1, 2 or 3 months from now is when you need to be planning for the decline of that item and the phasing of it out of your portfolio? The right time to phase out an item, you can actually build a table of classification here, and as shown on the previous slide, adding this as an assortment matrix into your process can actually help you to work out when and how is the right time to phase out an item. The criteria on this table are actually based on some statistical information that we use. However, any of these criteria should usually be built on the organisation within which you work. And then if you take those criteria, put them into a table such as this against the product assortment, you can then put a weighting against those particular criteria to work out with a score against that what the result would be, and then using the index score at the bottom, decide, due to the answer to your criteria and the weighting you've put against each of that criteria, whether an item should actually then be phased out. In this case, this item has achieved a result of 35, and therefore on the index score it's something that you should potentially phase out. The middle range would involve a decision as part of your S&OP process, and the planning of that is whether you actually maintain, try and improve that item, or actually phase it out. And if something is in the higher index score, keep the item or keep that product range within your portfolio. So within the 5 steps to supply chain success, the S&OP process, the monthly meeting cycle with the correct attendees, would manage the decision to actually stock or store an item in the first place, whether to phase it in or at the other end of the life cycle to actually phase it out. Work through this with your demand planning team, also your sales and marketing teams for their market intelligence. Validate those items to ensure that they are performing within your scorecard, your criteria and your classifications. Ensure that you actually include all of the people who need to be involved in the decision-making process, be that the sales or marketing teams. The finance teams will also have an impact on this, whether the product is actually able to be retained within the portfolio and is having value to the organisation. Also, whether you have the storage capacity and whether the management and the key performance indicators that you have for your business are still being fulfilled. We're hoping that this will have given you an opportunity to look at our webinar today, to get some ideas from it. Should there be anything that we have discussed today that you feel is of interest to your organisation, or you have any questions on anything that we have provided to you today, please feel free to type anything in the chat box, and my colleague Tim will be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much for your attendance today, and we look forward to receiving any questions. If there is anything that you wish to go back over, please feel free to let us know. And if you have anything that you want to discuss with us or anything to do with either this webinar or any future webinars that you get invited to.
Just got a question from Roger K. Was a recording done for this session as I missed the first few minutes? Yes, Roger, there has been a recording done and we can make that. Okay. Then there is a question from Sam. Do you have any tips for superseding mature items with new items? Yes, indeed. So this is an issue or a challenge that we see quite often, where there has been a new item that will be superseding an old item. Now, what I would recommend for that is to copy over the demand and all of the characteristics that you have for your old item into your new, such as your forecast and your demand, and potentially also review your lead times and review your review times for your new items. And with that, you have a good understanding of how high your first order should be for your new item. And yeah, just to try to be sure that you know exactly when that new item will be introduced and for when you need that item for. No problem, Sam. If there are any other questions, I'll be more than willing to answer them. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your attention. The webinar will be, can be made available, and I will ask our colleagues to send you a link. Thanks very much for your attention.